You're watching 535.
This is 535.
You're watching 535.
You're watching 535.
You're watching 535.
We're live from the Capitol, and 535 starts right now.
Good morning, it's Wednesday, June 3rd. Welcome to 535. I'm Leanne Caldwell. Today I am joined by Paul Kane of Notice. I'm also with my puck colleague, Mariana Sotomayor. It is my daughter's last day of school today for the year. I know, but definitely not the last day of Congress. So we have a lot that we're going to talk about today. We'll start with the House. The House is going to take up the war powers vote that they left laying on the table when they abruptly gavelled out last week because they thought it actually might pass. I'm going to talk to Mariana a lot about that. In the Senate, we're going to talk about FISA, if that has any path to passage. We're also going to talk about this reconciliation bill as well. And also we have a new element today at 535. It's called a moment of personal privilege. So what this is, we'll have this open seat ready. It is here and waiting for any member of Congress to come and talk about anything that's on their mind. So I'm talking to you members who are watching. If you just got out of a hearing, if there's a point you want to make, if you're going to talk about legislation that you're introducing today, or something that's coming up on the floor, this is your soapbox, this is your open seat. Come join us. We can't wait to hear your moment of privilege. So, now we'll talk about what's happening, news of the day a little bit.
Sure.
I want to start with you, Paul.
Okay.
Let's start with this reconciliation bill. As we know, the reconciliation bill has been completely stalled over this $1.776 billion slush fund. The president has indicated it's not going to move forward. And Todd Blanche yesterday told the House committee that it is dead. So what's the status? Is this actually going to happen?
So it just sort of dawned on me. One of the things that we should step back and remind everybody about, this is still a fight over the appropriation process, the funding process from last year, which by law was supposed to be finished up on September 30th, but then they punted later into the fall and early winter, and then they punted until the end of January, and by then, just when they had a big bipartisan deal to pass all of the appropriation bills, there was the clash in Minneapolis, which left 2 citizens dead and at the hands of ICE Border Patrol and the deportation effort. So now we have had this, they've peeled that off, and Republicans have now been trying for, well, since late January, early February, to come up with a way to pass funding just for those sort of border security agencies. And each time they keep trying to do something, they run into another roadblock. The latest being in mid to late May, when the Justice Department said we're going to create this $1.776 billion weaponization fund that was going to allow people potentially who stormed this Capitol building here to get paid for what Trump considered bad actions by the Biden administration. Senate Republicans in particular have erupted. They got them to stand down. They did get Blanche to say we're not going to do this, but it's still not quite enough. You still hear it from Senate Republicans. They're like, he said he's not going to do it, but do we trust him? Do we know this is going to happen? Could we get something in writing? They keep wanting something stronger. Now, their thing back in a few weeks ago, when this all sort of first stalled, or maybe you could say it was the 5th or 6th time it stalled, but Republicans were talking about putting guardrails on this fund. But then they realized that in order to put guardrails on this fund, they would have to essentially vote to create
For the fund, yes.
to create the fund. And most Senate Republicans do not want to cast any votes about this fund. It's considered that controversial. So now they're looking at ways of how can we get them to, like, you know, pinky swear that they're not going to create this fund. And until they get that, we're still stuck.
Well, it's so fascinating because Senator Bernie Moreno came out of lunch yesterday and he's like, this is because Democrats aren't funding ICE and Border Patrol, which, yes, that was the case a couple months ago, but now it is stalled because Republicans are refusing to fund ICE and Border Patrol because they are mad about this unrelated issue of this slush fund. You know, Senator Tom Tillis told a couple reporters yesterday, I was in the gaggle, where he actually wants it written into law that this slush fund cannot exist. He said he is going to offer an amendment that says that this slush fund can never be created. That's how little he trusts the president and Todd Blanche and the Justice Department and their word that it won't be created. And so do you think that you know, I know that Republicans are worried about Democratic amendment votes during Vote-A-Rama and reconciliation, but there's also a lot of Republican votes that they're going to have to take tough votes on too, right?
And that's the underlying issue that Republicans fear, is that if they move this reconciliation bill, you have to have Vote-A-Rama, which, you know, usually is 35, 40, 45 amendment votes. And if Democrats get to offer one that is like etched in law, there shall be no fund that pays out these type of things. Yeah, I think Tillis would vote with Democrats. I think Mitch McConnell would vote with Democrats. I'm pretty sure
Susan Collins has no incentive in her re-election campaign to vote with Donald Trump on this.
Yeah, throw in Murkowski. And, you know, pretty soon you could have a jailbreak where you've got other incumbents. Dan Sullivan in Alaska's in a very tough race. And then all of a sudden you're stuck with this being in the bill. You know, there were ways of trying to do something where they fix it all at the end of the process, the so-called wraparound amendment. But why would they vote for that wraparound amendment if they really just don't want this thing in law? And so here we are 9 months plus into the fiscal year, and you're supposed to be doing next year's budget work at this point, and Republicans still haven't figured out a way to fund these last pieces of the current
issues that are supposed to unite Republicans on Border Patrol and ICE. And it's a nice reminder that they did fund these agencies for 3 years in the one big beautiful bill, there was a large amount of funding in the one big beautiful bill. So Mariana, let's go to the House. Yes. The House is going to vote today on a Iran war powers resolution, and they pulled it from the floor before they went on Memorial Day recess because it actually might pass. Yeah. So what's the status today?
It might pass. You know, something that you all are talking about, kind of a through line that is now maybe connecting the Senate and the House, is this new YOLO caucus in the Senate. You only live once, but also I think up here it means you only lose once. So that might also put, for example, Bill Cassidy, John Cornyn as questionable votes on the Senate side on a number of things. They don't really have alliances to the president anymore. Why not vote against or for things that they finally want to see get done, right? So the House is coming back today. Lawmakers are back. And there's a number of Republican lawmakers who have lost their primaries. Notably, Thomas Massey, he's already been a renegade. Leaders are worried about him. And also Chip Roy, who has time and time again been a thorn in leadership side. But that's what I've been hearing in the leadership suite. They're all like, potentially going to vote against us? Are they going to start signing discharge petitions? Now you have, for example, Randy Feenstra. He lost his race to be Iowa's governor, and Dusty Johnson, too, lost his race to be governor of South Dakota. So they are just free agents. So there might be, we might see the YOLO caucus in the House forming. That all is going to be seen, I think, in today's War Powers vote. Republicans already expecting that they're probably going to lose it. There's a number of absences still. We have to see what the Democratic absences look like, because that's somehow how
Tom Keene is MIA.
Yes, yeah. That Republicans have been able to overcome, any Democratic votes or potentially losing votes when there are Democratic absences as well. But I've been talking to a number of chiefs who are like, this is going to be bad moving forward, because we have so many Republicans who either are going to continue to lose their primaries, and also some who are now, we've always seen the vulnerable swing district crowd, but there's a number of Republicans. Most notable comes to mind is Ashley Hinson, who is now in the fight of her political career in Iowa Senate.
Primaries are over.
The primaries
and
are
now
over.
people have to start transitioning to focus on a general election.
You just don't have
audience.
a reliable voting bloc in an incredibly narrow majority, so it's going to be tough for.
And wow, some people might start voting their conscience.
It's crazy. It's a crazy concept.
There's could be 2 more next week. South Carolina has the gubernatorial primary.
Oh, so Nancy Mace and
Ralph Norman,
who
are now underdogs because Trump thumbed his nose at both of them. Norman had endorsed Nikki Haley in the presidential race back in 2023. Mace helped lead the Epstein file discharge petition, among other things that they considered disloyal. And so he endorsed the lieutenant governor, who's now the favorite in that primary. So Norman and Mace, by next Tuesday night, could also become YOLO.
Yep.
Another big issue that is challenging the Hill. It's funny because yesterday in Puck, I wrote a short thing that said, Donald Trump seemed for a couple hours like he was trying to play nice with Congress. He dropped his demands for the $1 billion for his ballroom. He dropped the slush fund. He endorsed Randy Feenstra in Iowa, which Republicans up here wanted because of the down ballot impact. And it was like, maybe he was like actually looking out for their best interest. And then all of a sudden he says that Bill Pulte, the Federal Housing Finance Authority guy who has targeted, has been very controversial, let's say, targeting some of Donald Trump's perceived enemies, is supposed to be the director of national intelligence. This morning at a Puck Power Breakfast, I was interviewing French Hill. Of course, he's a chair of the Financial Services Committee, so he deals with Bill Pulte in that capacity. He's also a member of intelligence, and I asked him what he thought about this appointment, and he says that Bill Pulte absolutely needs to be focused on his one job that he has, which is at the federal FHFA. So how is this playing out on the Hill? This is a controversial figure. Let's start in the Senate. What is the ramifications and what are people saying?
So senators, by and large, are older and have been around longer. And some of them, like John Cornyn, part of the YOLO caucus, were here when the position of Director of National Intelligence was created. It was created in the wake of 9/11. It was a recommendation from the 9/11 Commission, where they realized that they call it pipes, CIA and NSA and Defense Intelligence, they all have their different pipes of intel and they weren't sharing. And this was meant to be an important position in which you would be the person sort of leading the information sharing of all the various intel. And so senators are like, they view this as a really important position. This guy, Pulte, big home builder. I believe they're the third largest, Pulte is the third largest home builder in America. That is a resume that makes him qualified to run his position, his housing position, overseeing Fannie and Freddie. It's not considered a position that would be, would be taking in all the various forms of intel and helping a president get it. Tom Cotton gave what veterans like us consider a very Mitch McConnell type of answer when he was asked about it. And it was funny because Thune was being asked at the weekly press conference about it, and Thune essentially said, well, the Intel chairman, Tom Cotton, is here. He could talk about it. And I think the exact words were something like, "I have nothing to add on that."
Yeah.
Which is very Mitch McConnell-esque for, I'm not happy with this decision. I really don't want to talk about it, and so please stop asking me any questions. Over on the House side, I'm not sure how bad the reaction was.
They don't have to vote on it, obviously, on the House,
Right.
but
Yeah.
it does impact like national security.
It does.
So
Johnson was asked about it, and he, of course, said, it's Trump's pick. We'll see what happens with Trump's pick, because Johnson obviously is not going to go against the president.
that's as far as he
But-
will go against Donald Trump. Yeah.
Correct. The interesting thing that Jeffries said is, because of this pick, do not expect House Democrats to support FISA renewal. And that's been a big fight, and obviously a number of discussions going on between the House and the Senate. Obviously, the initial deadline has been punted to next Friday.
For FISA.
For FISA. But there are a number of Democrats. This tends to be a bipartisan issue. It's usually when like the House Freedom Caucus says, well, we want these changes, that Johnson listens to them. That's why you see a number of these delays. But Democrats tend to be more or less a united bloc. I think that is the effect of Pulte on the House side,
Yeah.
is when you see these bills, particularly FISA, Democrats are not going to be a reliable vote here. How do you even let something like FISA renewal lapse in this
Yeah.
case? We'll see what happens in the next couple of days. Does that ultimately influence, or does the word get back to the White House and say, hey, we need to pull his nomination because we can't get things done up here on the Hill?
And Mark Warner has been sending signals. Mark Warner in the Senate is the top Democrat on the Intel Committee, officially called the vice chair for that committee. He's been telling Thune, hey, we're also probably going to hold the line. And this is one of those issues that's like the horseshoe, where the far left and far right end up sort of coming together, and you know that there's about 150 in the House who are going to vote no on this, and those are the far right and far left, where you've got the other the other mainstream Democrats and mainstream Republicans. So they have to have those Democratic votes, or else the bill fails.
Yeah. Some other things that are happening today. Markwayne Mullin is going to be on the other side of the dais for the first time. He's going to be testifying before the House Homeland Security Committee. This is his first time since he has been confirmed, anyway, as DHS Secretary. We also have Secretary of State Marco Rubio will be before the House Foreign Affairs Committee this morning. He was on the Senate. He appeared before the Senate yesterday, so this is kind of part two. Lots of questions for him. The House Energy and Commerce Committee will hold a hearing on the panel's GOP privacy bills. For either of you, Markwayne Mullin, I am struggling not to say Senator Markwayne Mullin right now. I need to call him Secretary Markwayne Mullin.
I still call him Congressman sometimes.
Oh, yes, the Wayback Machine,
Yes.
which wasn't even that long ago, not that long ago. Obviously a much different agency from Kristi Noem.
Yeah.
What do you expect House Democrats and or House Republicans separately to focus on in that hearing specifically?
Anytime you have Markwayne Mullin in a committee room, it makes me think of whether he's going to challenge somebody to a fight.
Yeah, fair.
Because that was how he first gained attention a couple of years ago, when he challenged a union boss to a fight, and actually sort of stood up from behind his side of the Senate dais. He had a tough confirmation hearing, and there were lots of questions about implied valor. Our good friend Liz Goodwin, our good friend Liz at the Washington Post wrote this amazing story about how he had kind of implied that he served in special forces. But the reality is, he's pretty well liked. Mm-hmm. Peter Welch was sitting in this chair a couple weeks ago talking about how he feels like he's getting better responses from Mullin, and he served in the House with him for a bunch of years and has served with him in the Senate for three and a half years. And so he's getting the type of responses that he wants.
Sorry, PK. I just have to interrupt because I see our first taker on the moment of
Hi, good to
personal
see you.
privilege.
How are you?
Hi, Congressman Walkinshaw. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks
Good.
for
I'm
having me.
Leanne with Puck. This is Paul Kane.
Paul, I know.
Mariana.
All right.
Yeah.
And Mariana also.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
So you're our first taker, or
Wow.
victim, I should say.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Of,
All right. Yeah.
Of the empty seat where you could get to come and
All
talk
right.
about what's on your mind today. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's Wednesday in the House, which this week, it's Monday in the
Yes,
House.
Yes.
That's right. We're
The
starting
House-
the work week today on
Yes,
Wednesday.
the House
yeah.
is back. The House
Yeah.
is back. So what are you focused on?
Well, I have 2 hearings taking place right now. So right down the hall, we have Mark Mullen, the DHS
Perfect. We were just
secretary.
talking about this. Yeah.
So I've been in and out. I'm getting ready to head back in there. I also came from an oversight new task force the Republicans have created on institutional abuses and constitutional rights, and they're focused on fraud in Medicaid in Ohio, which important issue to focus on, but in my view there are a lot of violations of the Constitution and institutional abuses coming from the White House at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, so I talked about that a little bit.
Okay, so you think that their priorities are misplaced?
Yeah, well, I think it takes a lot of chutzpah after you have defended this administration that even Republican appointed judges, I cited some of them, have said has violated the Constitution, violated the law. It takes a lot of chutzpah to set up a task force to address those issues and not even talk about the big elephant in the room, which is, in my view, Trump's violation of the Constitution and the law.
Is this is a task force
Yeah.
that oversight is doing? Is
Yeah.
this part of this weird thing where they're not actually holding committee and subcommittee hearings because you guys might be able to, Democrats might be able to offer amendments, and you've
Right.
got some renegade Republicans who would vote with you for
Yeah.
subpoenas and Epstein file stuff?
I
So
think
you're
this
in a-
might be adjacent to that effort. Basically
Okay.
what they have done, because in many of our subcommittee hearings, we've had bipartisan motions to subpoena Epstein-related documents, Trump administration folks connected to Epstein. They've stopped having those formal hearings in a lot of the subcommittees and said we're just going to have roundtables, which means you can't make a motion to subpoena anybody. A task force, it's not abnormal for a committee to create a task force for a period of time to look at one issue, but it is also the case that a motion to subpoena someone would not be in order in the meeting of the task force that we just had.
Obviously, we're in a midterm year, and
Yeah.
Democrats are in the minority, but I feel like this is the interesting season where you all are obviously doing your job, going to these hearings, but your questions may become even more relevant, especially if you all take the majority.
Right.
Even the line of questioning, you pointing out, number of places where the administration has shown corruption. Is that kind of a preview of what we could expect House Democrats to prioritize, especially as you all are talking in committee? Okay, when we have the gavel, we're going to bring these guys back and ask them these questions. Are you all going to form your own task forces to look into that?
Well, we'll either form our own
corruption?
task forces or use the existing committee structure or reorganize the committees and subcommittees to do that. And look, I think there's going to have to be a big accountability piece of our work if we're in the majority. We got to be careful. I think it's important to connect that to the challenges the American people are facing every day to make ends meet, right? As they're out there struggling to afford gas and groceries and rent and mortgage. Secretary Mullen, who's down the hall here, is flying on a $70 million Gulfstream G700, top of the line, to get home to Oklahoma every Thursday. So I think we got to connect those accountability issues with the affordability concerns that the American people have.
To be fair, that was a Christy Nome purchase.
That's right.
That Gulfstream, but
Yep.
yes.
Yeah, and
definitely
I'm going to
is-
ask
yeah.
him today, when I go in, I'm going to ask him whether he will sell. There's not just one. There were two jets purchased, 2 Gulfstreams purchased in a 737 MAX lease that the White House is now using. Not his decision. When he came in, he said he was going to assess those purchases. He seems to have assessed it and decided he likes flying on the Gulfstream because now he's doing it. I'd like him to sell those, buy a cheaper plane, just like the folks who are in the Coast Guard every day fly to keep the country safe.
Do we know if he actually, another thing that Secretary Nome, former Secretary Nome, did was that she was living in the Commandant's, the Coast Guard Commandant's headquarters.
Yeah.
Do we know if he's...
I don't think that's the case with
Okay.
Secretary Mullen. I haven't heard that.
Okay.
I do know that he has a family in Oklahoma, so he tries to get back get back there and maybe has another place somewhere in the DC region.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that he's in his Capitol Hill townhouse, my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does he have, in the Senate, he still seems to have some residual goodwill.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to Senator Peter Welch a couple weeks ago about Mullen, and he obviously voted against his confirmation, but was saying that there are still some good relationships, and he feels like he's getting more information.
Yeah.
Over here in the House, now he left at the end of 2022, and there's been a lot of turnover since then, but does he still have any of those bonds with some of the House Democrats?
I don't get the sense that he does. Maybe folks who have been here longer could speak to it better than me. I mean, he just described Benny Thompson, who's the leading Democrat on the Homeland Security Committee, accused him of racism, which is an odd thing to accuse a black man from Mississippi of. So clearly they don't have a good relationship. Maybe there are others where he does have a rapport, but I don't get that sense.
What else are Democrats going to be asking him today? I know you guys prep before hearings like this. There's usually a standard line of questioning.
Yeah.
There's obviously a number of things that he has to answer for, as we've seen DHS, especially under Noem, but he's taking over now. I
think the contracting policies, right? So Secretary Noem's policy of having her office approve every contract over $100,000, which is basically all of them at a department like that, and obviously then Corey Lewandowski being involved in that. That's under an IG investigation, the Corey Lewandowski piece specifically, but those contracting practices, I think, are coming up. And obviously the Delaney Hall situation and the continued kind of chaos around the deportation agenda will be a big
to clarify,
topic.
the Delaney Hall is the Newark airport.
That's right.
Yeah.
The detention facility.
What has his reaction been so far to that? Has he been asked about it yet?
Yeah, he spoke to it in his opening statement, and it was a typical kind of reaction that the left is creating a situation where there are violent protesters, and liberal politicians and Democrats are to blame for it, essentially deflecting responsibility for the really chaotic situation that's taking place there that he hasn't been able to bring under control.
Mm-hmm. Has he answered at all? I don't know if he's been questioned yet about the 18-year-old DACA, I think it's a DACA recipient who has no, violent record. She's been in Delaney Hall, and Democrats yesterday announced that, through the efforts, she has been released. Has he talked about that specifically?
I have not heard that.
Okay.
Maybe they're talking about it right now,
Sure.
but I haven't heard that. Democrats have raised the broader issue, especially those who have visited Delaney Hall and talked to folks who are being held there, the vast majority of whom have not committed any violent crimes or even been accused of any violent crimes. That issue has come up.
You're still not even at 1 year in office, so forgive me for asking the what are you going to do next question, but how much are you folks prepping on the House Oversight Committee? Kind of follow up to an earlier Mariana question. Are we going to see in the first couple of weeks, if the Democrats win the majority, still have to do that, but are we going to see it in January where you guys roll out and announce, 5, 6, 7 different lines of investigation and start seeing subpoenas going out right away? Or is there going to be like a sort of more polite phase of, we're going to first send that letter of, Mr. Secretary, would you kindly respond? What should we expect in terms of how quickly things will move from oversight Democrats?
I think it will be aggressive. We already, in terms of sending letters, requesting documents, we've been doing that. So Ranking Member Garcia has sent the administration a series of letters on different issues, requesting documents. Obviously, those letters typically go unanswered from this administration, but I think that work that we've already been doing is probably the best guidance in terms of the directions that we would head in January if Democrats control the committee. Obviously, for folks who have followed the Epstein investigation closely, there have been a number of instances where we have said we want to subpoena this individual or that individual. Some of the transcribed interviews, which is kind of a more informal process, in our view, need to be sworn depositions with cameras. So I think you'll see some of those folks being asked to come back in for that purpose.
Great. Congressman Walkinshaw, since you
Yeah.
took the moment of privilege, is there anything, last thoughts?
Well,
on your
tonight
day?
is a big night. It's the congressional soccer game. You know, the baseball game gets a lot of attention.
Yeah.
But tonight is the congressional soccer game.
Is it at Audi Field? Where is it?
It's at Audi Field. Yeah, we're going to raise money for the U.S. Soccer Foundation
Fantastic.
to increase access to soccer across the country. So I'll be suiting up for that. It's been about 5 or 10 years since I played an actual match, but I'm hoping to do all right. And there's this incredible list of retired pros that are going to be there.
Oh,
Carly
amazing.
Lloyd and John Harkes and all kinds of folks. So it'll be exciting.
Is there a clear favorite? Does one side usually win over the other?
I don't know that it is members versus the retired.
Oh.
I think they mix it up.
Oh, okay.
Because there would be a clear favorite, I think, in that case. I think the retired pros would take us pretty easily, and I don't think it's Republicans
play
versus
the pros?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's all mixed in.
Okay.
Is it a D versus
I don't
R?
think it is. I think it's just everyone's kind of mixed in. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, good luck to
Thank you.
and
Yeah.
your team.
Thank
Hope
you.
you have the best pros on your
Yeah.
team.
Hopefully, yeah. That's
Yeah.
that's what I need. Yeah.
Well,
All right.
Congressman, thanks so much.
Thank
Appreciate
you all.
it.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
All right.
Well, I think that we can. Do you have anything else to say?
No, it's great.
Have a good number of interviews
Yeah.
at 5:35 today.
Yeah.
No, amazing. Well, thank you guys for being here. I thank you all for watching at 5:35. We will be right back with a former Speaker Pro Tem, Patrick McHenry. So if you have any nostalgia for how things used to be, stay tuned.
You're watching 535, and we'll be right back.
This intolerable dependence on foreign oil is a clear and present danger to our nation.
We will not return to the days of gas lines.
I have repeatedly called for more energy independence for America.
I urge Congress to pass legislation that makes America more secure and less dependent on foreign energy.
After years of talking about it, we're finally poised to control our own energy future.
It's time to deliver true long-term energy independence in America.
We will have energy independence and energy dominance.
Lights on energy. Energy dominance starts now.
I'm Brody Mullins. We're back with 535. Right now we have Ed Brzytwa here from the Consumer Technology Association. Last month was Trade Month. What happened?
Well, we love trade at CTA. Trade is so important to every single one of our member companies, of all sizes, big, small. And World Trade Month is supposed to be a celebration of the role of international trade in our economy, in our country, our society. And we decided last year to do a trade week for CTA to really up our advocacy. And we did that again this year because trade is just fundamentally important to what we do in our industry and to get our member company perspectives across to the administration and to the Congress. And we think it was very successful.
So let's step back a little bit. Tell us about CTA, tell us about your membership, and tell us about your big trade show.
CTA, we're the Consumer Technology Association. We are the largest technology association in North America. We have 1,200 member companies. 80% of them are small businesses and startups. So when we talk about trade, we really do it through that lens and their experiences. And we represent not just the core consumer technology companies, the brands that we see every single day, but all these companies that are using technology to be successful and competitive and innovative in our country and around the world.
So why is trade so important to your members then?
We cannot live in a world where we're in isolation, just doing everything inside the United States. We need partners, we need allies. Human nature requires us to trade. And this goes back even to prehistoric times. And now, if we just trade internally with the United States, we lose out on so many opportunities. There are great innovations that are happening all over the world. Our member companies are taking advantage of those. And sometimes they need inputs from other countries to manufacture in the United States. Sometimes if they want to manufacture a product for the US market, they can't do it competitively in the United States. They need to manufacture it somewhere else and then bring it to the United States. But they do the innovation here in the United States, the research and development, the intellectual property. And all of that is mutually beneficial between the United States and our allies and our partners.
And you said you've been in this space for about 20 years?
A little over 22 years,
22 years, good. So what strikes me is that so much on trade has changed in those 22 years. I mean, when I grew up in DC and was a reporter, trade was part of how the US economy worked, with lower taxes, less regulation, pro-trade, free immigration. And it's amazing that we've shifted so much on trade. And then now in the last year, with the advent of tariffs, how has that policy changed so much, and how do you sort of fight back against that and try to get more free trade?
Well, back in the 1980s when I grew up, we had a very positive outlook on trade, and we also tried to address any trade frictions in a narrowly tailored manner, because the net benefits of trade were very apparent. Lowering barriers to trade to the US market, getting more market access in other countries, all of that was beneficial to our exporters, is beneficial to our small businesses. I think what has happened since the 1980s and since the onset of the NAFTA, and now the USMCA, and China's entry into the WTO, is that many stakeholders in the United States were affected in a way where they didn't feel supported by the government. There wasn't enough support, like for people to transition from one career to another career. And we lost sight of the benefits of trade. Trade is a factor in peace building around the world. When we have strong commercial relationships that are durable, there's better outlooks for stability and predictability and certainty, and that reduces the need for conflict. That is my personal view, and I think that's what we should be shooting for, as opposed to being in a shooting war.
And how do you get that message out there? How do you turn the tide on that?
We have to convince the American public that hiding behind a wall of tariffs is not in our long-term interests. We have to convince the American public that a constant state of uncertainty and trade chaos is not in the long-term interests of our country, of our economy, that having a proactive market opening strategy that involves durable trade agreements with our core allies and partners who share our values, that is what our country needs, as opposed to just being the hermit kingdom of North America.
So let's talk about the here and now. So Trump comes in, proposes tariffs a year ago. Those tariffs were struck down by the Supreme Court. Then another set of tariffs come in. Where are we now? There's a 150-day period now that we're waiting for the end of. Bring us up to speed.
So yes, February 20th, Supreme Court struck down the IEEPA tariffs, International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and the administration immediately that day said, we are transitioning to a new set of tools under different statutes. So you said Section 122, 150 days, that expires July 24th. However, last week, USTR signaled that they might institute a new action immediately after that expires. They also are undertaking all these Section 301 investigations, which is the statute that USTR used to investigate China during Trump 1.0, and that could lead to a whole new array of tariffs to replace the IEEPA tariffs. So there's an investigation on forced labor, there's an investigation on structural excess capacity in production. Recently, USTR announced a new investigation on Vietnam. They announced possible actions on Brazil. We're going to see more and more of these. There's another statute called Section 122 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which is national security based. And there's all these investigations that are happening on different product areas. There's tariffs in place on certain products like steel, aluminum, copper, lumber and timber, autos and auto parts. We could see more of those. And again, those are national security, and they may stick around for a very long time, given the history of those tariffs.
So Trump and some of the more populist Republicans have said that trade has not worked, it's hollowed out the middle class. You talked about the lack of retraining. Is there any evidence that these new tariffs are bringing jobs back to the U.S.?
We have not seen that evidence. I mean, for our industry, every single study we have shown says that tariffs are actually reducing employment potentially. I know from talking to our small business members that they have had to withhold hiring or let people go just to stay in business, just to survive as a company. They haven't been able to move into new innovations or new products or new research and development. And I think if you're talking about manufacturing, the data is very clear. The ISM, the Institute for Supply Management, their data shows that month after month there's been a contraction in manufacturing employment. A lot of that is the companies that are in the process of consuming inputs that are now tariffs. So they have to make those payments and they cannot, again, employ people or hire people. They might have to let people go.
So we've got all that, and then we've got USMCA. Tell us about USMCA. When was it enacted? What did it do? And now it's expiring.
So the USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, is the successor to the North American Free Trade Agreement. This was negotiated under President Trump's first term. And at that time, he said it was the greatest agreement ever negotiated. It passed the Congress, both in the House and the Senate, by historic bipartisan margins. This was broadly supported in US industry, other stakeholder groups across the country. It's been in effect for 6 years. And now at the 6-year mark, this is required in the agreement, is undergoing a review. And US government has said there are certain problems in Mexico and Canada that need to be addressed for us to extend this agreement. And so the July 1st deadline is coming up. And
so it doesn't expire, it just
does
has
not
to be renewed.
expire.
Okay.
It does not expire. Either the parties, so Canada, the United States, and Mexico, have to make an affirmative determination to extend it by 6 years, but if they don't, it goes into this 1-year review process. So every year they're going to be reviewing it for 10 years. And at that point, if they don't extend, then it goes into this termination phase.
So, you know, on 535, we're up here on Capitol Hill. All we hear about on trade is from the administration, but Congress has a huge role to play here. What is Congress's role and what are they doing?
So in this review, it's not clear to us whether the changes are going to be so substantial to require a new vote by the Congress. Right now, the Congress is advising on what it thinks the USTR and the administration should prioritize for the review. Our view is that because of those historic bipartisan margins and the support broadly for the USMCA and the Congress, the administration needs to work very closely with the Congress, making sure their views are addressed. And what I'm hearing, based on what we did in our trade week, is that there is still strong bipartisan support for keeping the agreement tripartite, meaning that it shouldn't be split off in two agreements between one, Canada and the United States, and two, Mexico and the United States. It should stay together. We need a strong North America for US competitiveness.
And so you're up here talking to members of Congress, emailing with members of Congress and staff. What are you hearing? What are Republicans saying? What are Democrats saying?
Amongst Republicans, the support for USMCA is strong and enduring. Same with Democrats. There might be issues they identify that need to be addressed, and that's natural when you're looking at a trade agreement, and this is very novel. We've never had an agreement that undergoes this kind of review process, but at the same time, no one's saying that this agreement needs to go away. As a matter of fact, they're all saying, for the sake of the United States and our future, and for our region, we need to have this agreement in place. It needs to be tripartite.
Ed Brzytwa, Consumer Technology Association, thanks for joining us. I'm Brody Mullins. We'll be right back on 535.
You're watching 535, and we'll be right back.
A simple blood test can detect Alzheimer's years before symptoms appear. Congress can connect Americans to early, accurate dementia diagnosis by supporting the bipartisan Alzheimer's Screening and Prevention Act, allowing Medicare to cover blood-based Alzheimer's screening. Congress has acted to cover mammograms and other life-saving screenings. Now it can redefine Alzheimer's care, unlocking early detection and access to FDA-approved treatments when they work best. Congress, it's up to you. Paid for by the Alzheimer's Association.
National Association of Realtors Advocacy, working to expand access to housing and defend property rights so that more Americans can build generational wealth and prosperity through home ownership, a critical voice in nearly 1/5 of the U.S. economy, supporting 2 jobs for every single-family home sold, and generating more than $760 billion of property tax revenue for state and local governments each year. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors.
Welcome back to 535. I'm Mariana Sotomayor, congressional correspondent at Puck. Our next guest has a very personal experience. Of course, many lawmakers come here having lived a lot of life, and that inspires legislation and definitely gives them the drive to push a number of priorities through. Joining me now is Congresswoman Erin Houchin, a Republican from Indiana, who's here to share her story. Hi,
nice to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us for the first time at 535. I want to turn it over to you. Obviously, you have this bill. It's called the Points Act. Stands for a number of different things that you're about to get into. Tell me if I'm wrong. The story goes, when you were in college, your dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and the medication really amplified this addiction to gambling.
Yes.
That inspired this bill. Tell me more about it.
Yes, so thank you for asking. My dad passed away of Parkinson's in 2019, but when I was in college, he was prescribed a medication for Parkinson's that actually has been proven to provoke compulsive behavior, and his compulsive behavior resulted in a gambling addiction. There have been no resources federally dedicated to combating gambling addiction at the state level. So for the first time ever, we're taking the excise tax revenue and we're sending it back to states to raise awareness and provide opportunities for families to get help from gambling addiction. I experienced it, as a child of a person who suffered from gambling addiction. Of course, my mom, was the spouse of a person who suffered from gambling addiction. It's a very tough position to be in, and we want to make sure that these resources are dedicated back to the states, especially with the, the incredible growth in sports betting. That is affecting younger and younger Americans, and this is going to be monumental. It's the first bipartisan effort we've had, and the first time ever we're redirecting funds back to the states for this purpose.
You mentioned that excise tax. I want you to talk a little bit about that, simply because we know how much funding, government funding for the states or for different programs has been debated, not just on here on Capitol Hill, but specifically among House Republicans on different fronts, as you all have had the majority. Immediately the instinct might be, wait, why is the federal government funding that? Where is that money coming from? We shouldn't, use taxpayer money even more on issues like this. So I'm not sure if you face that kind of pushback, but when you're explaining this to colleagues to kind of build a coalition to possibly pass this, what do you tell them? Tell us a little bit more about that tax.
So the excise tax is tax that, it's no new taxes, so we're not raising taxes to fund this. We're simply redirecting funds that the federal government is already collecting from excise taxes for gambling. There has been debate on the Hill about whether we should be paying the excise tax or not, but that's not part of this conversation. Currently, we're taking those excise taxes and we're bringing them into the federal government. And none of that is going back to help states combat this issue. So I was very pleased to be part of this effort to redirect all of those funds, $100 million back to the states that's being paid by the states and into the federal government, back from excise taxes, back to those states without raising any new revenue. We're simply just saying this is something that this funding should be used for, and we're going to make sure that it is.
You also mentioned the fact that everybody, it seems like up here on Capitol Hill, is talking about the prediction markets. I've seen so many different bipartisan bills come through, or just different proposals of how to put guardrails generally on prediction markets. Do you think that kind of the conversations that are happening gives momentum to potentially pass a provision like this?
I think so. We have Kalshi and others that are, these prediction markets that you can bet on literally anything. I know my colleague Blake Moore from Utah has put this issue front and center as one of his priorities. I do think the Points Act will be part of that conversation because we can regulate, the gambling market potentially. We regulate gambling in, every state, but we don't provide anything on the back end for support. And coming from a family that had this experience, it was just really important to me to turn around and to try to look at that impact and what could be done to soften that for families across the country. I think the Points Act achieves that, and I'm certainly proud that it's bipartisan as well.
Yeah, this is, of course, just focused on gambling, but there's many other addictions out there. Do you kind of see this, especially if it can become law, right? Do you see it as almost a test run to see if this works, that you can apply it potentially to other addictions?
Well, there are certain revenues that go back to states for combating smoking and other addictions like that. For me, it's about raising the awareness of the issue and providing those supports. But we're also working on issues of trying to keep kids from doom scrolling. We have the Smart Kids Act, which asks the Surgeon General to issue guidance on what is healthy. Now, some may say none is healthy,
right.
But I was pleased that the Surgeon General did just issue, the Department of Health and Human Services did just issue guidance on what would be considered reasonable screen time for kids. Mm-hmm. When I talk to school groups, I always tell them every time their finger swipes that screen, they should think cha-ching, 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 because they're actually making money for the tech companies, and they should just put their phones down and head outside. One of the things they say to me is, but my parents are addicted too. Mm-hmm. And I tell them, then lead the way. You lead the effort to say, hey, mom or dad, let's put the phone down and go for a walk. Let's go have a conversation. Let's go enjoy the great outdoors. So I'm pleased that the Surgeon General and the department are taking this action. It doesn't always require a law change to make some of these positive changes happen, but it does help to file a bill which then maybe moves the conversation forward more quickly.
Yeah, you perfectly segued to what I wanted to talk about. Obviously, a series of bills coming out of the Keeping Kids Safe Online caucus. That's fairly new. I know it's you and Congressman Jake Auchincloss.
Yes.
Democrat and Republican, leading this charge. Obviously, you guys are parents. There's a number of parents up here on Capitol Hill where this is also a topic of conversation. And if I remember correctly, there was a jury back in March that found Meta and YouTube that were negligent in a social media addiction case. So what's Congress's role there? It seems like obviously that is in some ways a green light. It goes to what you all are arguing, that there are negative and harmful effects to children. It seems like pretty open space in terms of guardrails in which you can put forward.
Yeah, and it's not a question, right? We know that it is harmful. It's been proven to be harmful. It's been proven to be addictive. So those studies are out there. Congressman Auchincloss and I we co-chair the Kids Online Safety Caucus. We've been working with Jonathan Haidt from the Anxious Generation, who authored The Anxious Generation, and his research team on how we could craft legislation that would be responsible. Now, my personal view is that this should be a floor, not a ceiling, that the federal government should set a floor for a standard, and that the states should be able to do more to protect kids, especially because they're much more nimble than the federal government can be. But my story, when my daughter was 13, she got access to Instagram without our knowledge or consent, hacked around our parental controls. When we discovered the issue, I contacted the platform and said I'd like to delete her account. They said she's 13, she's legally able to have it. If she wants to delete the account, she can. That's because in 1998, Congress passed the Kids Online Privacy Protection Act, which said 13-year-olds can be adults online. So I'm on a mission to change that to at least 16.
Yeah.
I discovered that Jake Auchincloss had written a Substack that said that 16 should be, with parental consent, should be the standard. And I immediately sought him out and said, let's work together. So we have a number of bills that are designed to protect kids online through protecting them from chatbots to social media harms to at the platform or the app store level, creating protections there. We think that 16 is the minimum because kids ages 9 to 13 for girls and 11 to 14 for boys, that is the most at risk they are for eating disorders, for peer pressure, for depression, for anxiety. This is a really, really important issue, the issue of our time that I'm happy to be championing.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned a couple of things that we've seen unfortunate outcomes to that, again, go back to social media. Let's talk about those age restrictions because, again, it is obviously a conversation, one that you're pushing, but we haven't seen necessarily too much a fulsome arc, let's say, of any of these bills really becoming law. Obviously, COSA is a big one, passed the Senate, kind of got stalled here over on the House side. There's some, pushback to a piece of legislation that has to do with all of this that we're talking about. The age restriction part is one where obviously there's an array of opinions. How are you building that coalition to say, okay, even if we have to narrow down and just put a bill forward that has to do with this, to just raise that age limit to 16, are you finding those people?
Yes, that's my sole mission, honestly, in this conversation is raise it to 16. So that's why I filed the Reset Act and, working with Jake Auchincloss on Parents Over Platforms to make sure that you can't lie about your age and pretend to be 16. You have to have age assurance, and that there is a responsibility from these platforms and the app stores to protect kids from online harms. But when I have these conversations and when I tell my personal story, People can't believe it, that this was the circumstance, that a 13-year-old could have access to these apps without their parents' knowledge or consent, which means that you're locked out as a parent, not just from their phone, but from their bedroom, from the door's locked, the social media companies are there. Think about this. Kids as young as 9 are learning how to hack around their school's, internet to get access to these apps. Even if you don't give them a phone, they can still access Instagram and other platforms to have access to messaging, where they could be messaging who they think are 13 and 14-year-old boys and girls all over the world who are actually adults. It's very scary, the level of influence that is being imposed on our children without our ability to protect them. So there is a lot of conversation around the Hill about this and how to approach it. My mission is to raise the age to at least 16.
Do you think it gets done this year, or are you looking at the next Congress, hoping to push it there?
I pray it gets done this year. I think that parents across the country would share that view, especially knowing the dangers. And I'm just going to keep pushing for that. There are lots of things that we need to do. I think that's number one on the list of the ways that we can protect our kids, is moving that standard up. So it's not legally allowable for these platforms to engage with children at the age of 13.
Right. Well, Congresswoman, thank you so much for sharing on what you're working on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks for coming on.
Great to be with you.
You're watching 535, and we'll be right back.
You're watching 535. We'll be right back.
He is what your show is called, The Decider.
It's Washington's hottest new show, and it has the Beltway buzzing.
Americans, they know BS when they see BS.
Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Brody Mullins.
Is this era ending and is a new era beginning?
And veteran strategist Lisa Camuso Miller.
Have you ever had to tell a client no?
Talk to the biggest and most influential players.
We wanted $1 million. He said done.
Rewriting the rules of influence.
Business is going to be on the ballot.
Congress needs to do their job.
They become lapdogs rather than watchdogs.
The people who never talk.
That's such a good question.
Talk to them.
It was kind of fun, actually.
It's Washington's only show by and for insiders.
Welcome to the Deciders.
Watch weekly right here on 535.
You're watching 535.
This is 535.
You're watching 535.
You're watching 535.
You're watching 535.
We're live from the Capitol, and 535 starts right now.
Welcome back to 535. I'm Brody Mullins, here with Rob Egge, Chief Public Policy Officer at the Alzheimer Association. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.
So you got a huge fly-in today.
Yes.
Maybe the biggest of its kind.
That's
Tell us
right.
about it.
Yeah, so over 1,000 advocates are here from all 50 states. We believe this is probably the largest fly-in of its type, and we're all here for one purpose, of course, which is to talk about Alzheimer's and the federal policy agenda that we have with Congress. We're especially fired up this year because we're all focused on one thing that really stands out to everyone with the experience with dementia, which is the diagnosis. It doesn't go well, but we think we have the right policies in mind to change that.
So let's start with your purple tie. What does the purple mean?
Well, the purple is something that we focused on that represents to us the fact that this is a bipartisan issue. Everything we do brings together Republicans and Democrats, just like the nation as a whole, but with agreement on a common platform. The one thing I'm proud about is we've never had issues that divide us as advocates from all across the spectrum. When we get together here, we find that's true with Congress too. When they talk about Alzheimer's, they also see this as an area where they can agree and move forward on some really productive, needed things.
So let's start from the beginning. When people are diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and unfortunately everyone knows someone, we feel like that's, or I feel like that's the beginning of the end. But in fact, up to 20 years earlier, you can do testing to find out.
That's exactly right.
What?
Yeah, so what we're aware of, what we're used to with Alzheimer's is just what you described. Usually the diagnosis, over half the time it never happens. When it does, it's years after symptoms start. But we're a lot like other chronic diseases. We're like cancer and others, like heart disease, where the start of the disease we believe is 10 or 20 years beforehand. We see strong biological evidence that's true. And we also believe that Alzheimer's, to be like other chronic diseases, the earlier you start, the better. We right now have trials underway. When I say we, I mean the field, that will confirm what we believe, which is that even before symptoms is the best time to treat. But what we can say right now is we want to start at the very first moment of symptoms, and no one is diagnosed then. So we're losing valuable time while people figure out what's going on and deal with it.
So Alzheimer's is still incurable, but if you're diagnosed earlier, as early as possible, there are steps you can take to delay things.
That's right. Yeah, well, that's established now with world-class phase 3 trials, that if you start, and we also have established that the earlier you start, the more effective it is. You have more time for treatment, and you have better response to treatment when you start as early as possible.
So I read that treatment for Alzheimer's, more than $400 billion per year.
That's not yet reflecting treatment. Right now, as a matter of fact, it might be an interesting...
That's just cost.
That's the cost of the disease.
Okay.
So, if you look at other chronic diseases like cancer, it starts to become treatment. Money well spent, that's what you want, but that's not where we're at right now. As a matter of fact, CMS had projected what our early treatments would cost at this point. It's a lot less than they thought it would be, because a lot fewer people are getting diagnosed in time to take those treatments.
Well, that's sort of where I was trying to go, is it seems like you can make an early investment, right, to try to head off that $400 billion that comes later.
Exactly. So we have this massive expense. That's projected to grow to as much as $1 trillion in today's dollars by mid-century, not far from now.
Wow.
And that's all caught up mostly right now in Medicaid. So it's the federal share and the states that are bearing the burden of long-term care. We want to avoid that for the sake of individuals, but the system as a whole, and treatment's the path to do that.
And so tell us about the ASAP Act, ASAP.
Yeah, so the ASAP Act, as soon as possible, is one way you can think of it, but it stands for Alzheimer's Screening and Prevention. This is critical because it brings us to where other chronic diseases are. So Americans, when they hear this described, I'll describe what it is to have Medicare coverage for Alzheimer's screening blood tests. That doesn't take place today, and right now, unless Congress asks, that pathway isn't available. So Congress has stepped in, starting with mammograms about 30 years ago, selectively to say it's time for this, let's create the pathway so if Medicare decides it's appropriate, they can provide coverage. That's what we're lacking here, and we need to get that.
And you call that your mammogram moment. You're at your mammogram moment.
So people understand, and all the way back when we've said this, it resonates, that people know you want routine screening, you catch things early, and you treat it early. That's the missing opportunity that we can fill right now with Congress, is to do just that. So it would be a blood test. You can picture it just like you would go in and have your cholesterol as part of your blood test, A1C for diabetes. This should be part of that mix.
Wow.
And then when it's flagged, then people can act on it.
It's a simple blood test.
Yeah, a simple blood test.
That's amazing.
The technology is there now.
Wow. And where's the FDA on this?
The FDA has cleared 2 tests, but right now it's important to say that's for diagnosis. Okay. So the same test that could work for screening, but that has to be verified by FDA. What this legislation says is that if and when FDA clears those tests for a screening purpose, which means before symptoms, then there's a pathway to coverage for CMS.
Let's go back to the bill. Tell me about the Senate sponsors, the House sponsors, and where does the bill stand?
Yeah, so we're really excited about this. So where we stand right now is just a few months into really pushing this. We have almost a quarter of Congress that's signed on, House and Senate, and we expect from our Hill Day that's been going on and over 500 meetings on Capitol Hill that we're going to have a big bump coming up to these numbers. And so we're having good traction in both the House and the Senate. The House is led by Chairman Buchanan and Congressman Tonko, and on the Senate side, it's Senator Collins who's pushing this with Senator Warner and others. So it's a great team going full steam.
7.4 million Americans living with Alzheimer's that we know of, and
Yes.
you're saying many more just never diagnosed.
Yes.
That must mean that every meeting you walk into on Capitol Hill, a senator, a House member, a staffer has a personal story.
Yes.
How does that impact your advocacy?
Well, it makes it a lot easier to connect. The same is true, by the way, when members of Congress speak about this in any town hall setting. Everybody gets it. We had polling just done, and one of the questions we obviously establish is, what's your connection? About close to 50% have a personal connection from a loved one with this disease. So it's like
I would
cancer.
think it'd be more than 50%, but still.
Yeah, and if you add in people like friends and people you know in the neighborhood, it is.
Yeah.
It is pervasive. And so it's a point of connection that everybody shares. And that does lead to getting right into the issues. People connect with this. You know, we had a moment at the start of our fly-in where we just asked, who's had a bad experience with diagnosis? All 1,000 hands went up. Everybody gets this.
Wow. Back to the statistics on Alzheimer's. You said 7.4 million now, probably more. Is that number changing? Is this something that's being diagnosed more, or is this disease itself changing?
Well, so that number comes from our case finding estimate of what would be if we did have a diagnosis as well. So that's our best guess of what the truth actually is. We see that growing more, in part the prime drivers in an aging population. And so that's the biggest driver of that trend. We hope we can change that on the positive side with healthy lifestyle. So we have much more confirmed evidence than ever before that with a study called the US Pointer Study. It was in JAMA last year that establishes rigorously that we can make a big difference in cognitive health and things like dementia, Alzheimer's, through these healthy steps that people can take.
And talk a little bit more about the polling that you've done here.
Yeah, so when we did this polling, we asked them some simple questions. So first of all, I'll say there's one other poll we did last year. In that response, 9 in 10 Americans said they want access to a simple Alzheimer's blood test. The polling that we did this year was more political, just a few months ago, and we asked people to describe their opinion about Medicare being able to cover these tests. 90% said yes. Of the 10%, it wasn't opposed. A big share was just said, I don't know. Got to understand this better. And what we also found, as you can imagine with those numbers, the Republicans and Democrats were just about aligned. When we asked them for 2024 voters, for those who voted for Harris, it was 94%. For Trump voters, it was 88%. So as I said, this is a purple issue.
Last question. I've covered advocacy for a long time. A lot of advocacy is statistics and numbers and polling, but you've also got these personal stories. What do you find is the most effective way of persuading members of Congress to support this?
I think it is the story. Exactly right. And that's what we try to emphasize. Go in and just tell your story about your experience with diagnosis or the lack of it. And in my family's history, we see that things have not changed in decades with this disease in terms of how things can be diagnosed. Now we have the opportunity with these new simple blood tests to change that and be just like cancer and other experiences.
Amazing. Thanks so much for joining us. Rob Egge from the Alzheimer's Association. I'm Brody Mullins. We'll be right back on 535.
You're watching 535, and we'll be right back.
In Afghanistan, the IED actually penetrated the vehicle between my legs, but it was a miracle that we all survived in the vehicle.
When I began the process to separate from the military, it was during COVID. And with the issues back home, we just knew we got to come back home and take care of the family. So we had to go stay at our mom's house. And there was already 3 people living there, and 5 of us, or 8 people. How many bedroom? Like a 2-bedroom. Like a 2-bedroom house. We were desperate.
So then when we transitioned to Texas, it was very much so like, what are we going to do now?
When I came home, I needed a new roof due to a storm, and I was about to lose homeowners insurance as well. I applied for Operation Homefront Critical Financial Assistance Program. They've really been a blessing.
I'm in the Permanent Homes for Veterans program. They built a house for me, and it's amazing.
We got the call, this is your house, and the kids and I took off just to go sit in the driveway and cry. It's life-changing. It took us from a hopeless situation, and now we're homeowners. We have a savings account.
The best way to describe Operation Homefront is that it's like a family, because they're always there for you.
I would say you guys are angels behind closed doors.
Operation Homefront has impacted my family in a way that's probably going to be passed down through my family's history. It's definitely going to be a story that's going to be told for generations.
Welcome back to 535. I'm Leanne Caldwell with Puck News. Today, I'm going to talk to Congressman Sam Liccardo, a Democrat from California, who's also a freshman Democrat. He has been engaged in the new Paramount merger, where we are seeing a lot of pushback in the European Union. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but we're also going to talk a lot about AI, which is also one of his specialties. So, Congressman, thanks so much for joining today.
Great to be with you, Leanne.
So, this Paramount merger, it looks like it's going through, but there's some pushback. We're getting a lot more pushback in Europe than we are in the United States. So talk about why this matters.
Well, there's a lot not to like about the deal, and for the European Union, particularly around antitrust issues and consolidation in media markets, which we know has been an ongoing trend. But what I'm particularly concerned about is, one, particular company within Warner Brothers, that is CNN. Obviously a very important news source for millions of Americans, and we have already seen sort of the creeping authoritarianism over organizations like CBS because of this administration's control. In this case, we have a combination of factors. One of the key investors, Mohammed bin Salman, the head of Saudi Arabia, Prince, controls more than $10 billion of the investment through their sovereign wealth fund. He is no friend of free journalism. He has been identified by U.S. intelligence as being the individual who gave the orders for the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, a Washington Post journalist many years ago. And so clearly having people like this behind the merger, potentially exercising control or influence over what may happen at CNN is deeply concerning. And then of course the fact that the Trump administration has been just deeply obsessed with destroying CNN and trying to control it. David Ellison has publicly made comments indicating he would comply with the White House's interest in removing CNN's management. This is what gives me great concern and heartburn, is what can happen to free journalism here in America.
So you have journalism concerns. There's also some concerns about what actually happens to the entertainment industry in California, which is where you're from. Obviously, you're from the north, from Silicon Valley area. But the former Democratic Attorney General, Bill Lockyer, he wrote in the Hollywood Reporter this week, he said that that there is risk for allowing legacy entertainment companies to weaken further in an increasingly difficult market, especially in the face of entrenched dominant competitors like Netflix. Financial instability can lead to fewer productions, less creative investment, and ultimately more jobs leaving California altogether. So he's arguing that perhaps this merger could be good for California to boost the industry. Do you agree?
Look, it may or may not be good for the entertainment industry. I'm certainly not an expert in that space. I'm deeply concerned with how Americans get their information, particularly in a moment like this one, when information is being so manipulated by algorithms, by very powerful interests throughout, particularly here in Washington, D.C. And I'm concerned about the control of Americans' data. More than 100 million Americans have data that is in somehow or another personal data, financial data in the hands of a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. And that kind of control, particularly by foreign actors like MBS, who does not have America's best interests at heart, is deeply disconcerting.
Great. Let's move to AI. This is an issue that you have some unique perspective. You have written a lot about this, or talked a lot about this. You wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post recently. I have talked to you in my job at Puck, which you brought such a unique perspective that perhaps AI should not be regulated in a sense from a congressional standpoint, and you can explain this better than I can, but perhaps an outside entity or a more lighter touch to overseeing AI. Can you explain how you think the industry should have guardrails around it?
Yeah, and I think the question whether it's a lighter touch or heavier touch really depends on likely what the company is actually doing, because this could actually be a very significant constraint. What I proposed in the op-ed was a fairly straightforward proposition for a lot of folks in Silicon Valley, which is that regulation is virtually impossible in this industry because of the nature of the technology. What they call the problem of interpretability. It is very hard to understand exactly what's going to come out of a model, no matter how much you may know about the model weights or the algorithms or the data that's being used to train it. All these levers you can pull and turn do not necessarily give you an assurance of what's going to come out of that model. That makes regulation very hard. And certainly Congress is not very well equipped to understand how to do that. What I have proposed is allowing an entity that already exists, it's called Casey, exists in the Department of Commerce, to be able to set a threshold that would provide incentives for companies to have a race to the top for safety. And the way it would set that threshold is based on what the best practices are in the industry for safety along various categories of risk mitigation. and really establishing the threshold for what are the best practices. Those companies that reach that threshold, and it would need to be a very high threshold, would enjoy what's called preemption, protection from any state law liability, but only if they meet that threshold. Most of the industry would still be subjected to 50 different state laws and regulation, which is what the industry hates the most.
Yeah.
And so the idea is to create strong incentives for them to get out of that thicket of liability, and the incentives will drive them, hopefully, to adopt the very best practices technologically.
This doesn't sound like a very democratic plan. How are your Democratic colleagues entertaining this? Are they entertaining it? Because it feels like the party is moving more toward a heavier regulatory system.
Well, some are, to be sure. I think folks who spend more time understanding AI fundamentally get it, because no matter how much we may want a heavy hand in regulation, it turns out that we simply cannot regulate in the same way that we regulate automobiles or drugs. We simply don't have the ability to say thou shalt not, and know that as a result of that regulation, the best attempts to comply will actually result in compliance.
What about some of your Democratic colleagues who are talking about a fund, perhaps taxing AI companies, or AI companies creating a fund to help job displacement, energy costs, etc.? Is that are you even thinking about that, or do you think that that's a separate issue?
No, well, it is separate, but certainly it is important to consider as well. I'm coming out with some legislation soon on what we do about next generation jobs and skills, and certainly we can provide carrots. In my case in the bill, we're talking about how tax credits can be used to incentivize companies to invest in community colleges and state universities. But I think also the idea of a token tax to help pay for reskilling and upskilling, and frankly, for a massive jobs program that I think is critically needed in this country. Look, we've got a lot of roads and bridges and housing and a lot of things that need to get built. We're not building it today. Having a fund of public resources that could help employ an awful lot of folks who may be displaced, or young people who may not see a future for themselves without a job like this, this could be a great opportunity for us to do a lot of good in a lot of communities at the same time that we're keeping people employed. So I think a token tax or something along those lines is very much on the table.
You were involved in discussions and conversations with Republican Congressman J.O. Bernotti. You've even had bipartisan meetings with him, or bringing in a bipartisan group of freshmen, I believe, to talk to some key AI stakeholders. It seems like those talks have broken down. How come?
You know, I don't see it quite that way. In fact, I know Jay's moving forward with his legislation, and there may be a couple other colleagues of mine on the Democratic side that will join his bill. I won't, but that, happy to continue working with him on it. I was a little concerned about the breadth of preemption that he had proposed in that bill.
Describe that.
So preemption, the idea, obviously many of us are concerned about AI safety. We've got 50 different states that have their own ideas about safety. And it is important for me, if we are going to preempt the efforts of those states to make AI safer, particularly states like California and Massachusetts that are really moving forward, New York very aggressively, what we need is a federal standard that will supplant it to ensure that we have safe AI. And simply preempting without any clear federal standard is problematic. Now, I think he's pivoting a bit, and so I don't want to speak specifically to what's in his legislation. I think it'll emerge in the next several days, and I continue to be open to having conversations with him and my Democratic colleagues. The reality is this is really a fluid, dynamic situation right now. We know that certain aspects of this have become very partisan because of pronouncements from the White House. But I think we have an opportunity for bipartisanship here, in part because we are all still very high on the learning curve.
Is the White House pressuring Republicans to walk back some of these AI plans?
Some of the openness that I may have experienced in conversations with some of my Republican colleagues has clearly been mitigated by pushback from the White House, no question about that. Though what we're seeing now in the White House over the last several weeks is some competing voices there as well. And so, like I say, this is fluid. I hope that gives us an opportunity to actually get to something that will work. I think more important than the ideological which end of the spectrum you're on is, can this actually work? And goes back to my original point, which is, no matter how heavy-handed you want this regulation to be, you better be concerned if regulation can't work. So let's start with what works.
Congressman, we have to wrap there, but I do have one fun question for you, part of our 1 minute.
I rise with the intention of disrupting the normal business.
I ask unanimous consent. I ask unanimous consent.
The senator from Nebraska is recognized.
The gentlelady is recognized.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Who is your favorite person on the other side of the aisle? You are a freshman, so I'm really putting you on the spot here.
You know what, I'm going to say Jay Overnolte, since you mentioned him. He has been fantastic to work with. We're on a couple bills on high-scale immigration, for example, which is a tough issue, I think, for Republicans to come out and support, given what's going on in the White House and the caucus. But Jay's just been a very collaborative guy. Even when we don't agree, it's always friendly, and we move on and find other things to work on.
Great. Congressman Sam Liccardo, thanks so much.
It's been great to be with you. Thanks.
It's 5:35, and we'll be right back.
You're watching 535, and we'll be right back.
This intolerable dependence on foreign oil is a clear and present danger to our nation.
We will not return to the days of gas lines.
I have repeatedly called for more energy independence for America.
I urge Congress to pass legislation that makes America more secure and less dependent on foreign energy.
After years of talking about it, we're finally poised to control our own energy future.
It's time to deliver true long-term energy independence in America.
We will have energy independence and energy dominance.
Lights on energy. Energy dominance starts now.
I'm Brody Mullins. Welcome back to 535. Today we have Mark Keida, partner at Narrative. Mark, you've got some new polling to talk about. Take us from the top. What's the voter environment right now?
Yeah, voter environment is affordability. This is a record affordability election. And I think back, Brody, to past cycles. Affordability has been a top of the fold issue. Nothing like I've ever seen in this year. Just to give you some context. The University of Michigan publishes a consumer sentiment study. They're tracking this
going back for decades,
all the way back to 1962, I believe. This month in May, we hit a record low, 50.4. That's lower than what happened in the Great Recession of 08. It's before the recessions in the early 90s and early 80s and during the oil embargo. Like, that puts it in sharp relief. If you ask people, how's your financial situation today? 55% will tell you that it is getting worse. That's also a record high. And when I think of like what is it? It's household economics. It's things like gas, groceries, housing, healthcare. Gas, for example, it's gone from, you ask Americans, 60% will tell you gas prices right now are a major issue for them. That's up from 33% just last fall. Healthcare, same thing. Housing. Groceries actually the number one issue. 62% say it's a major problem. So the through line is, kind of your household economics. And the other thing to point out about kind of the affordability in the election is that, voters are saying affordability is the issue that we want to hear about. And they're saying Washington, pardon Washington, I know we're deep in it. They're saying Washington's singing a different tune. So if you ask voters, what do you want to hear from Washington today? They say, about 61% will say, I want to hear about inflation. I want to hear about the cost of living. I want to hear about solutions that are going to reduce what I'm paying out of pocket. If you ask, what are you hearing? What are they talking about? You'll say, well, the Republicans are talking about foreign conflicts and wars and immigration. Democrats are talking about health care and transgender issues still comes up and other issues. Only about 20% say they're talking about the issues I want to hear about. So there's a real opportunity, I think, to bridge these two poles, which is massive affordability, squeeze on Americans, and they want to hear more from Washington about those issues.
It's funny because I feel like members of Congress are constantly talking about affordability. I mean, they're not passing anything, but it seems like they're constantly saying gas prices are too high, grocery bills are too high, housing is too expensive. We had this housing bill that passed the Senate, is now passed the House today. It seems like Congress are taking steps, but you're saying that is not being heard.
I'm just looking at the opinion, right? That message isn't breaking through as much as I'd say members of Congress are expecting it to break through, because there's still about a 40-point gap in what people say they want to hear and what they're actually hearing about.
Wow.
I know there's no silver bullet solution. Policy's challenging, it's difficult, it's good Congress is talking about it because acknowledgement is kind of the first step of that. But it's a gap, and voters are kind of paying attention to what kind of solutions are being put forward.
Fascinating. Now, will that hurt both parties equally this fall, or is there a partisan breakdown? I mean, Republicans obviously control the House and Senate. Would they be more blamed?
Yeah, I mean, the data suggests that the party in power is typically the one, historically over the last 20, 30 midterms, there are only been 2 times where a party doesn't lose seats, and the economy and inflation is the issue of the day, and voters are kind of making a referendum on that. So my expectation in the data would suggest that Republicans have more on that question than Democrats, but it's a question for both parties.
Any silver lining, any positivity in consumer confidence when it comes to prices? Probably not.
I'm not seeing a lot of positivity. I was startled to see kind of the data from the consumer confidence. And when you look at the number of people who are just raising this, if you go into a focus group and you ask, like, what are you hearing? What are you concerned about? You'll spend 30 minutes talking about still the price of eggs, price of milk, how people are going to get to work, $75 to fill up gas. Like, it's not easy. That's what's top of mind.
Fascinating. Let's talk about a different topic, private credit. You've done some polling on private credit. What are you hearing there?
That's a fascinating topic, right? Because not every issue starts with voters. There are some issues that start in kind of niche circles, and they move from, in this case, it's an issue that's moved from the financial pages to the front page. Private credit, if you don't know private credit, it's lending from non-banks. It's taken off of the last decade, post-2008. It's an opportunity for small, mid-market businesses to get alternative financing from traditional banks. Interesting topic. What's happened?
Go ahead.
Yeah. What's happened in the issue is that there have been a handful of bad headlines this year around a specific issue of redemptions, and people who are investing in private credit want to get their money out. Some of the firms that are offering that have limited those withdrawals. That's raised questions in some headlines around, well, what's the implication of this for the broader financial economy and broader healthy economy in the future? So we did a survey with 57, we call financial insiders, people who worked on the Hill, at committees of jurisdiction, they were at think tanks, trades, at Treasury, SEC, like financial influencers of policy and regulation, to understand, what are they hearing? What kind of education do they want to know more about private credit? Because they're just starting to tune in a more intentional way. And we heard 3 things. One, I think most of us remember 2008. Everybody wants to avoid that. So even if there's this idea that maybe there's some turbulence in the market, they want to know that's not going to happen again. They wanted to know that specifically that private credit, for example, is invested in the real economy, as they say. Hard assets, real companies, real projects like infrastructure, data centers, and the like. Not like 2008, where some of the insiders told me that was the time of kind of paper products, divorced from the underlying asset. That was a danger zone. So number 1, real economy. 2 is on transparency, the idea that just because a private asset, private markets are private, doesn't mean it's a black box. So they wanted to understand more about how investors are getting regular information, judging performance over time. And the 3rd area around liquidity, that's where the headlines have come from. The question there was, are these products, they're built for the long term. They're not ATMs. I think there's an expectation sometimes that with public markets is you can day trade with this, right? Private credit's built for long term. Long-term investors like pensions and endowments are the ones that are making investments, and that's the right investment environment for them. So those 3 things, again, this is an issue where when industries, and it's not just private credit, where industries are moving from those kind of niche circles to broader audiences and they're starting to understand the issue. Industries need translators more than they need cheerleaders, if you will. People to put what it is in plain English for them, and that's the opportunity in the private credit space.
You also did some work on AI and data centers. What are you hearing on that?
So AI, this is fascinating, right? The data's moving every month. The headline here is that the public is not anti-technology, anti-AI, but the trust gap is significant. And you see this in AI, and where you see this playing out is in the data center debate, which is huge right now. 2 things to know, just to point out. On AI, about half of Americans are using AI, like ChatGPT, Gemini, something like that. Half are using it at least once a week for personal or for work reasons. So the adoption's starting to take off. But in terms of trust, only 40% of our survey respondents in our Nexus Pulse survey said that they trust the AI industry generally to do the right thing. And 57% of Americans say that they want more regulation on the AI industry, and that's far above any other industry that we tested. The challenge here is this kind of who benefits and who loses. When you ask voters, who's going to benefit with AI, 23% say businesses are going to be the ones most to benefit, the ones implementing AI systems. Only 3% said employees are the ones to benefit. So there's still this adoption. Now where it really meets, kind of rubber meets road, if you will, is in data centers. We've got about 2/3 of Americans who say they see the value of data centers in their everyday life. You got about a 2-to-1 ratio. Americans will say the long-term benefits of data center development outweigh the short-term risks. The rub here, and this connects back to the decline, the trust gap, is that what you're hearing on the ground when they're making local siting decisions is the communities are saying, I want to make sure the benefits accrue to the community. So they're looking for rate protections. They don't want to see their electricity rates go up. They want to know there's good local jobs. They're not just bringing people in from outside and then they leave. They want to know you're hiring from the community. They want to know the environment is protected, that water is protected, things like that. I think the opportunity for policymakers is people are open to this. The playbook's still being written. What people want to see on the ground is durable, what I call the new social contract, durable bargain with a local community that has teeth. I know that's a policy question of how you build teeth into that, but people want something real.
Mark Keida with Narrative Strategies, thanks so much for joining us. Hope you come back with your next round of polling. I appreciate it.
Would love to do that.
I'm Brody Mullins. We'll be right back on 535.
You're watching 535, and we'll be right back.
America leads the world in medicine development.
It matters.
We get new medicines first, nearly 3 years faster.
5 million Americans go to work because we make medicines here at home.
And not relying on other countries keeps us safe.
But China is racing to overtake us.
Will we let them?
Or will we choose to stay ahead?
When America leads,
America cures.
Let's tell Washington to keep us in the lead.
I enlisted as a medic to be there to help my patients, and after an injury, I found myself as a patient. I experienced post-traumatic seizures. Depression is a big one that comes along with it, PTSD. So I pursued my PhD in neuroscience and regenerative medicine. The coalition has helped fund my academic pursuits. They genuinely care about helping the vet in whatever way that they can. Through supporting the coalition, you're supporting some of the veterans that have the biggest needs.
Visit saluteheroes.org to learn more.
Welcome back to 535. I'm Paul Kane, senior congressional reporter for Notice. Joining us right now, Patrick McHenry, a former member, a former chairman, a former chief deputy whip, briefly a speaker pro tem. Was that what we all settled on as the title for 22 days?
And brief, which I was most settled on.
Yeah. And now out in the private sector. One of the things I want to talk to you about today is what it is like to transition from working in these buildings and going out into the private sector, into retirement from this place. There is an exodus that's happening around here. Depending on how you count the numbers, it's like one site had it as 58 retiring House members, but I think we've already had some who have left already, so it's over 60 or so. First of all, how many members have called you up in the previous, as they were thinking about running, how many might have called you up and just said, hey Patrick, can I just talk? What's it like? How do you go about this transition?
It's a not insignificant number. And I've only been out for, less than a term.
Yeah.
But when I get a member call, the odds are it's to talk about what's next, not about something that's current. And I've heard this from some of my mentors when I was leaving. And this is, frankly, I had Democrats and Republicans super helpful to me when I was trying to figure out what to do next and how to think about, what are my expectations? How do I leave? How do I properly leave? And I've had Democrats and Republicans be very helpful. And so there's still that level of collegiality and in trying to help people when they're trying to do something else, or to think about the dynamics of how to leave and when to leave.
Okay, well then let's backtrack a little bit. And how did you make that decision? Because by these standards here in Congress, despite our mutual hair coloring, you were really young for retiring. You had obviously hit the term limit at House Financial Services Committee as chair. So that's a natural point when some people decide to retire, but you still are young enough, and there was, paths possibly back into leadership. What was it that got you to that decision that it's time to retire?
Well, first, it's the nature of power in the House. If I'm just cutting through all of this, the nature of power in the House is the most powerful people in the House have a position that enables them to carry out a legislative agenda, or are the gateways to getting legislation across the House floor. So it was power, right? And as a ranking member on a committee, I had a certain amount of power, but as chair of the committee, I had real power within the four walls of that committee. And in coordination with my leadership, the power to carry out a legislative agenda across the House floor. That's what I wanted. That's what I was here to do, is pass legislation and to affect outcomes of legislation. And when my term limit was up, I thought that was a natural endpoint. I'd served 10 terms in the House. I got elected the week after my 29th birthday. 10 terms, six years running the Financial Services Committee. I respect the term limits internally in the House. I think they're very important for a healthy turnover, so you have the next leadership team that's able to go carry out their work. And I knew I had a great leadership team that were competing to run the Financial Services Committee. So I knew I left the committee in a good place with what was likely to be the next leadership set of options. But I did have the moment in October of 23 on really putting to the question, did I want something else in the House? And that was a moment of clarity where I knew affirmatively this was going to be this was shaping up to be my last term in Congress.
And that's because October 2023, your close friend Kevin McCarthy gets ejected as House Speaker in a rebellion by what he would call the Crazy Eights, the 8 House Republicans who team up with Democrats. And because there has to be a speaker, you get that job as pro tem. But it was that moment where you felt like this is a conference, a Republican conference, that's just too cannibalistic, and you sort of decided this is wrap up my committee work and get out of here. Because there would have been time for you to sort of go back to the rank and file and think about getting your way back into leadership, maybe becoming actual speaker.
Yeah, there was, and I had to decide, was I matched for the moment, and was I willing to do the things necessary to carry out power here in the House? So a lot of that was just self-reflection and trying to understand my qualities within this institution. When I was, and the timing does matter here. In fairness, if you'd asked me as Chief Deputy Whip how I wanted to leave the House, it's very different than where I was in actually post-COVID, and in 22, 23, and thinking through what I wanted to do here. And I realized I wanted to carry out policy, or at least have the shot of getting policy enacted. Turns out I didn't get much of the policy, much of what I wanted enacted in a law under my watch, but I knew my timing was not right, and I was not right for that moment.
For that moment in terms of shooting up for becoming a speaker or leader? Or
I'd rather be a committee chair who cut deals and got things done than to be the Speaker of the House that was constrained by my party and constrained by the external politics of going into a presidential election cycle. And so part of that was like, am I a match for that?
Okay.
If I don't think I'm a match for that, could I be a match for that? Can I do the things necessary? And I decided no and no.
Got it.
And also in the midst of that clarifying moment, which was, did I want to be a longer term speaker, temporary speaker, a longer term speaker? And that was something I didn't want.
Do you think, you've had a year and a half on the outside almost. It's a strange question, but do you think it's crazy that more people aren't retiring, that this place has become so dysfunctional? Or are you are you happy that some people are sticking around to provide some institutional knowledge on things?
So what I said when I announced my retirement was that I still believe in the institution, that the institution has ebbs and flows.
Okay.
And there are really great times where this institution is very functional and has the highest quality people running the place. And other times where you still have high quality people, but it's absolute dysfunction. And other times everything's just a mess. And those things ebb and flow. You've seen this over your journalistic career.
Sure.
I saw it in my 20 years. And when I got elected, the year I got elected, Bush was reelected to the presidency. On the cover of Time and Newsweek, it was all about permanent Republican majorities.
I remember.
Okay, one was this, and it was actually the physical print of it, right?
Uh-huh.
The Newsweek and Time were both really published in physical form. Times have changed, and then we went from 2004 when I got elected, sort of the high water mark, and by Katrina hitting, it's that far back. And in early fall of 25, that was the end of the Congress. That was the end of the Republican majority. We just didn't know it. 9 months into the Congress, we're done. And then I saw the absolute ripping apart of the institution for the next year and a half. So I didn't come in on a particularly great situation, super functional and everything else. And then when I'm leaving, everybody's like, well, it used to be so great. And I'm like, actually, we have all this gauziness of history of saying, well, they really got along. Pelosi was so nasty to Trump. They need to get along like Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. And I'm like, actually, what Nancy Pelosi said about Donald Trump was very similar to what Tip O'Neill said about Ronald Reagan, 40 years before. So, all this stuff kind of ebbs and flows, and you've got to kind of fit in as best you can and get the best out of it as you can.
There was that point, your first term, in 2005 and 6. If you study Gallup congressional approval, they do it every month, just about every month, and they've been doing it for 30 or 40 years. And there used to be a time when you were still, an aide up here, or was it College Republicans?
Yeah.
And congressional approval would hover around 40-45%. After 9/11, there was a big kumbaya. But then right after 2005, and you had Katrina, there were the corruption scandals involving Abramoff, the Page scandal in 2006, and the war. Ever since then, it just feels as if there was some breaking point about it. What was it? Was it technology and the media transformation and cell phones? Or was it something in the air up here?
Both. It's both. We've become a far less functional institution. The House has become a far less functioning institution. I would say Congress, Senate has obligation in this as well. You then drew in members of Congress. You had a higher degree of members of Congress that came in to be influencers, effectively, rather than policymakers. The institution wrings that out over time, punishes that over time, and rewards substance over time and deal making over time. It still does.
It still does.
It's just harder to see it now. It's still evident. But rewinding, you had this massive technological change. And rewind to 2004, you didn't have social media as it exists now. you didn't have yet the iPhone moment where you have ubiquitous high-speed connectivity, biggest data sources possible, biggest consumption was on your device in your pocket. It had not switched. When that switch came, we could see everything much more closely. And rather than waiting on your story to be published the next day or your weekly column and waiting to see what you said in your weekly column, it was what you tweeted that day that drove the moment-to-moment news cycle. That all shifted. It also meant these private rooms here were no longer private. And it became jarring when I went from the situation where you waited and the news story got printed 2 days later about some, frankly, asinine thing I said in a small group meeting, which
happened in your early days.
Oh yeah, and a lot, because the frontal lobe development was not sufficiently there. But that took 2 days, right?
Yeah.
Or in a different news cycle, and it took a lot of journalistic work and everything else. And instead of actually that being built up, it's like boom, and then I see something instantly quoted, almost in real time, from me sitting in a meeting with a dozen people, and I see within a couple of minutes of what I said being out to the world. It changes the nature of people's interactions in those closed rooms.
For me, that moment was when John Boehner walked into your conference meeting while he was still speaker the morning after the Pope arrived, and just announced that he was resigning, he was going to retire. You know, the Boehner mic drop moment.
Oh yeah.
And there were a bunch of reporters, friends of mine like Jake Sherman, who were fighting over who had actually tweeted the news first. And then me or somebody else had to announce to the world that the news was broken by Congressman Bill Huizenga of Michigan, who in the room at the time grabbed his phone and tweeted, "John Boehner just announced," and this was like not even a full minute after hit send. Back up to your first couple of years though, and I want to talk about this. A lot of members don't even remember this because they got to, they came around in 2018, 2020, and they saw you as this, fine, upstanding establishment type of person. But your first couple of terms, you were, I don't know, what was the worst thing Boehner called you in those?
Well, I don't think I can say it. I don't think it's appropriate for the internet.
I don't know. We're not.
No, I'm kidding. No, I mean, I was a bomb thrower. I came in, I wanted to shake things up. I wanted to go, and there are two levels to this. I had sincerity of purpose. I wanted to go shake things up and produce conservative outcomes. That's what I campaigned on. That's how I won my election, my runoff. That's how I got elected to Congress at week after my 29th birthday. But I came in with sort of a hell-raising attitude. I had served in the State House, though. And I'd served in the State House, and I saw how things functioned. And I came up here and thought things are different, that you need to go throw, you actually do need to throw bombs in order to be relevant. I did that for almost 3 years. And then I had this, actually it was 2.5 years. And it was about this time in 2007, and I looked around and I thought, I'm not getting what I thought I would get out of doing this. I'm not getting the respect of my colleagues. I'm not getting the attention that I want. I'm getting attention, but not the attention I want. I was like, this doesn't make sense. And so the smartest thing I did my second term was stop. I mean, I stopped. And I then took notice. And then I spent effectively the rest of that term and the following term studying, learning, like it's basically graduate school. That's how I describe it, of how this place works, watching how power is utilized, who's effective, who's not effective. I still wanted to change things. I still worked hard. There was still a lot of effort in it, but the key thing I did was shut up, right? So in my first 2 terms, I spoke more on the House floor than I did in my next 4 terms.
Wow.
I pulled this. Until I became a committee chair, it didn't tip the balance. And because I was a committee chair, I had to be on the House floor.
Managing legislation.
Yeah, managing floors and everything else. But it took that long. It took till my last term before that balance flipped, where I spoke more in my final 8 terms than I did my first 2 terms, as absurd as that is.
There were things that were done to young Patrick McHenry.
Oh, yes.
And you and I have talked about this privately, but the earmark, they voted, and your Republican colleagues joined in, I recall, where they voted ripping your earmark for a Christmas tree farm out of a bill.
Okay, so what I studied after this, after the initial, imagine going to the House floor, you're a second termer, and the House unifies on a position that they want to show you and teach you a lesson. And you look around and you're like, this stings, this hurts. And you can either go bad on that, you can either get high off those vibes, or you can take notice. I took notice. It took me time, but I took notice. And then I studied what happened to me. And I had so deeply pissed off the appropriators that my earmark, and this was the last earmark I requested, by the way. I had never requested earmarks again, even when they came back in my final term and all that stuff. Never touched them again. But I realized, so first thing, I made the request sincerely. It got renamed, which made it even your description of it now, it's not what it was, but they earmarked this, they changed the name of it. And then they tipped off Jeff Flake, who was the one who would always go after appropriators projects. The appropriators tipped him off. And then I had this unifying moment where everybody looked around and said, I had all the Democrats, and I had some of them tell me afterwards, you're like, no, you're the only earmark I voted to strike.
Yeah.
Right. So it was like, I had been so notorious by my second term that you had rank and file members say, oh yeah, so it's McHenry? Oh yeah, I got this one. And they knew to vote no. And so it was the moment where there are lessons that are learned. You have some that want to encourage you on your path to being smarter, and you have others that just want to pummel you to teach you a lesson. This was an act of violence on the House floor. And out of that act of violence, it was the shakeup, which was like, I had looked around before going, I'm not getting the response I want. And I was like, what do I do about it? And then I had violence, which was like basically the House floor erupting to beat the snot out of me in public to see if I cry. And I looked around and go, well, I didn't cry. But I did. It was the wake-up call.
But
it was the wake-up call.
The incentive infrastructure has changed so much.
Oh yeah.
That punishment, when it happens, people love getting punished. Adam Schiff got censured.
And he raised to the Senate.
He got so much attention, he locked in his nomination for the Senate. Would a young Patrick McHenry serving in his first or second term right now, would the incentives push him into becoming a fine, upstanding person who works for conservative policy, or would he go on to become an influencer?
I want to say that I would have done differently, but the incentives now are so dramatically different that you then build stature out of being a loser here. And you have more losers in the House that have a high profile outside of here, but are completely irrelevant to the policymaking stuff in the guts of this institution. They are complete gadflies. And in a different era, they would be shunned. And in this current era, they have stature outside the building, which then constituents say, do you know this person? I'm like, yes, I know this person. What do you think of them? I say they're a complete joke. They spend all their time being a loser inside the House so they can go get a social media following or a media following. and then get quoted, even though they're not in any of the meetings, they don't shape any of the policy, they don't care about the policy. They just want to have that sort of that shine outside of here for whatever they think that power that is. They think of as power, but it's not power here inside the House. So I'd like to say it's different, but the incentives are so dramatically different. The punishment I got was the finite cause of me waking up, and the course of my congressional career changed dramatically because of the institution checking me.
Yeah.
And I woke up, and I think if you saw where I was in my fourth term, it was the culmination of the benefits rendered unto me by people that hated my guts. And the good thing is I got to study them. I got to study the people that are the most effective in the House. I got to emulate some of the best characteristics and try to minimize some of the deepest flaws. I tried to do that. And I think, I still am a student of the House of Representatives with enormous respect and deference. And there are few in the media like you, who get that, who look at this institution and say, no, this as an anthropologist, it is the most fascinating place to be on the planet, to go see how these things evolve and how these entities interact with each other to get something that should be the public good. It is a wild and awesome place. And I left this place with such deep respect and reverence for it, without any sense of bitterness to it. And even that summer of 27, when I got the snot kicked out of me, I look back at that with such gratitude. It was such a special and important moment that I needed in order to be a high-functioning human being.
You were a high-functioning human being as a lawmaker, but that you did have some viral moments. One in particular in October 2023. We've got the video queued up. That was. Let's see the video.
Accordingly, pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
All right. So that was the moment where you banged the speaker gavel so hard, I think it shattered. Did it actually break?
I wish I could say I broke it, but I did not.
You did not.
I did keep it, though.
You did?
It's one of the pieces of, it's one of the things I stole. I'll just admit it. I took it.
Hold on. Whoa, is the ethics committee aware?
Well, I'm outside the House now, so they're going to have the Department of Justice come after me.
I don't know. You're here. You're here. You kept the gavel.
I kept the gavel and the plate. And if you see the end of that clip, Chris Bien, who's still Speaker Johnson's one of the smartest guys on his team, was working the dais, and he says, "You want to keep that, like the gavel?" And I was like, "I want to keep that."
Right.
And so no, but that plate, I had this moment, and it was a flash as I'm standing up there of just pure, absolute rage, of just like this moment where I'm like, I've held it together, I've held this all together, and it just flashed. Now, walking off, there are two former members, Bob Dole and Jeff Denham, and in their time, they presided over the House, a significant amount, and they had a competition on who could break the gavel. Who could break the gavel? So walking off the dais, I was like, I should text Dole and Denham. That was my first thought after it. So it was a good release of whatever the pressure was that I had in my mind.
Okay, well, we're closing out today, and I have asked unanimous consent. Nobody is objecting. You are Speaker of 535 for the day, and we are gaveling out, everybody. Please come back tomorrow. I'll be here with Nancy Pelosi. We have a whole slew of lawmakers. You'll really enjoy it. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.